Congratulations on all that you're doing. People all over the industry are watching you. And now Malcolm Blackwell's book has come out, so a lot of people are understanding what Phil and Debbie and what your leaders have done and how it worked and why it worked. You can get his book. He's got a best-selling book out now that's on the New York Times bestseller list called David and Goliath, and it describes exactly what happened to First Financial Security and why you were able to achieve what you were able to achieve and how it's going to get even bigger for you. So congratulations on what you're doing. This is a chance for your dreams to come true and make a lot of money. So I look at those old maps. You can get these ancient maps and you see the Philistines and you kind of wonder why Philistia, it was called, why this country was a problem for Israel in antiquity, but it's because these maps can be very deceptive. When you look at maps of the Middle East, it's not how big the land is or the country is. It's not how much space or geography. It's how much water. And today, of course, it's how much oil. So Philistia was a country that hugged the Mediterranean. It had great trading partners. It was a very formidable foe, and it had Israel under its thumb. You know, we just celebrated Independence Day, and many of you are looking forward to celebrating your Independence Day. And it seems like there's always somebody who wants to put us under their thumb. For us in the United States, we celebrate independence from Great Britain. I spoke recently in Hungary, in Budapest, Hungary, and they sang the national anthem. I asked them about that. I said, where does that come from? Oh, it's about 160 years old. I said, 160 years? That's not very long ago. And where and how? They said, oh, Austria. So the Hungarians, their independence was from the Austrians. There's always somebody that wants to dominate you and make you dependent. Sometimes it's our own government that wants to make us dependent. And our instincts as individuals and as countries and as people is to seek our independence. Emma Goldman once said that about independence, that you will only have the independence that you are intelligent enough to want and courageous enough to take. And that's what it requires for us in business too, for our dreams to come true. And you can go to the Middle East, you can tour the Holy Land, and in Jordan, there are these great places. I remember going up on the mountains in Georgia, in Jordan, where you can see where Moses was when he looked down on Israel. And for some reason, as a little kid, when I heard that story, I thought that Moses was up like kind of on a little hill and he could look out towards the horizon. But oh no, this mountain, I mean, I don't know how we got up there, but you're up there and you can see for miles, you can see two countries from that elevation. So it's like you're in an airplane looking down where he died. And so you can also see the spot where David fought Goliath, supposedly. It makes a lot of tourist dollars, whether it's real or not, who knows. But they base that on the archaeological finds of Gibeah. If you actually read, you should read the best-selling book that's out now, but you should also read 1 Samuel 17 and read the actual story of David and Goliath. And I say that because all of us heard this story as children. And we grew up there. These stories are across culture. I mean, in Hungary, it's János Vitae. It's a little boy who leads his country to victory. And you just go a few miles away, and there's a shoemaker's apprentice who kills the dragon. In Poland, it's under Wawel, the castle, and then you go a few miles in a different direction in Prague, and it's the tailor's son. It's all different. It's a dragon, but the stories are all similar, and you'll find them in every culture all across the world, that the unexpected can happen. The little guy can win, and the big guy sometimes gets overconfident, which is what has happened in your industry. So read that in 1 Samuel 17, because it's an adult story, but we were told the story as children. And so you got to read it as an adult, because there's a lot of things they don't tell you when you're a kid. So if you visit what we call the Holy Land. You'll go out in buses, and they may take you to that spot. If you read the story in 1 Samuel 17, you'll see that the Philistines, their base camp was Gibeah, this little village. So because archaeologists have found what they think might be Gibeah, then they're able to extrapolate that on the terrain and topography and say, here's the dry riverbed, this must be the place where David fought Goliath. And if it is, you also see that there are these hills on both sides. That's very important because that explains a lot about the story. When two armies are fighting each other, there's a certain dynamic that occurs. One army is stronger than the other. So the weaker army makes up for its lack of strength by maneuvering into the right position. Throughout history, this is usually the terrain. So the defensive army will move into the forests where it has some advantages over the attacker, or it will move into mountain positions, or it will move behind a river. In fact, that was the dynamic even up until World War II. The armies in the great Soviet-German battle, the Russo-German War, and the Eastern Front, World War II, that was really the biggest death toll in World War II. That's where the war was fought. And that was behind rivers, each army maneuvering behind a river so the other army would pay a dear price for attacking. So Israel and Philistia, they're locked in this ongoing political and military confrontation. It's very expensive. I served a president of the United States during a war. And when there's a war on, everything focuses on that war. You have to win that war. Everything depends on that. To give you an idea of the cost, in Jesse's family, in this story in 1 Samuel 17, he has 8 sons who are at battle in uniform and 1 son who's home running the farm or the ranch. He's with the sheep. Now, you just take those same numbers and apply them all across the Israeli nation, and you get an idea of how expensive it was. That can't go on for a long time. You need that manpower, that personnel to help you run your farm, run your ranch. But that's the cost. And this was going on for months as these two armies maneuvered around the Middle East and finally found a place where they stopped and were ready to fight their battle. And it was 2 mountains separated by this dry riverbed. So when you go there and the buses unload and the tourists all get out, you walk into the riverbed and everybody picks up a few rocks because they're cheap souvenirs. They're a lot less expensive than when you buy in Jerusalem or Tel Aviv. And you can take those home with you in your suitcase. So, but this is what will change your understanding of the story. When you stand in that dry riverbed, you look and see where the Philistines were based on the archaeological discovery of Gibeah. You can see where they were with a direct water supply from the wells of Gibeah. And then you see where the Israelis were. And they are pretty substantial hills or mountains. You're really going to huff and puff to get up there. It's going to take you some time. In fact, when you look back towards the Israeli side, they almost look like limestone cliffs. It's almost like a miniature Dover, like you're looking across the English Channel at Dover or something. And you can understand. I didn't understand when Goliath faced David. Before he faced David, he gave this speech, and the Israelis panicked and they run. I wondered, well, why didn't the Philistines immediately attack them? They had them on the run. They were disorganized. This was demoralized. This was a perfect chance. Now I understand, because they had their defenses back in those limestone cliffs, and the soldiers raced back up to those defensive positions. And it would not have been an easy thing for the Philistine army to dislodge them, or the other way around for the Philistines. So here the two armies are locked ready for combat. Here is Jesse sending his son David to the front to get a report. There is no CNN. There is no Fox News. There's no correspondence embedded with the army. So he's got to send the last remaining son who's running the farm up there to pass out a few bribes and get some information and come home. What's going to happen? At this point, they're almost saying, hey, let's get this thing resolved. This is costing us so much money. This is so expensive. Somebody decide this thing and let's get on with our lives. Are we going to be slaves or are we going to be free? What's going to happen? So David arrives. And just as he arrives at this scene, it so happens that these two armies have decided to fight. So they've come down from their defensive mountain positions down into this valley, which is quite large. It's several miles. You can see it would hold a lot of people. We don't know how many soldiers there were, by the way. I've researched this, and it's a low of somewhere around 20,000 soldiers on each side to a high of 200,000 soldiers on each side. So we don't know exactly, but we know, hey, it's it's a pretty big city, and it's a lot of people. I'll just put it this way. How would you like to cook breakfast tomorrow for 200,000 men? You get an idea. Or how would you like it if you were in charge of sanitation tomorrow for 200,000 men? You get the idea. Somebody was working very, very hard to keep this thing going day after day after day. So here, David arrives, and just as he arrives, these two armies have moved out into this area in between this valley, and they're ready for combat, and David runs out and he finds his brothers. Now we know later when we read this story that David loved uniforms because his brother Eliab made fun of him about that. His brother mocked him and said, oh, you're here, you see the band, you heard the music, you saw the uniforms, the color, this must be a big day for you. He was making fun of him. So David, he was like a lot of young men. He was into this stuff. He knew all the weapons. He knew all the colors. When he arrived, even though this may be a city of 400,000 people, he could find his brothers. He could see the flags and know the Philistine army and the Israeli army, and he could find his brother's division, and he could find their company, and he could just look at the colors and know how to find their flag and get them. And he got there, and he was with his brothers when Goliath appeared. And this was the first time that David had ever seen Goliath. And Goliath gave a speech. Now just imagine, he gives a speech, but there's no microphone. So if I'm giving a speech and there's no microphone and you can't hear me, it becomes pretty difficult. So here's Goliath out there. There's 400,000 people. Maybe it's only 40,000. Again, as I say, we don't know, but it's somewhere in that range. Nevertheless, he's out in the open air. The only people that hear him are the people on the front rows that are close to him. They're the only ones that can hear his speech. And he gives this speech, and it says, when you read this story, all Israel fled. They ran. They panicked, and they ran. So the men that were closest that heard the speech, they panicked and they ran, and that spread panic and fear in everybody else, and they all fled. That's why I said I wondered why they didn't immediately attack. But all Israel fled. Now, I grew up in a preacher's home. My family was very religious. My father was a minister, and my grandfather was a minister. My grandmother was a minister. My great-grandfather, it went back 5 years. When I was born, the guilt was like in my blood. I came out, everything was wrong. So, and even that was wrong. So, because I have people have to say, you shouldn't feel guilty. I know, I'm sorry. So you can't do anything right. So I spent a lot of time in church. That's how I know these maps, because I'd look through the Bible, I'd get bored, I'd finally start reading the maps. That's how bored I was. So I would hear this story. Now, I'm an old guy, so I like being old. It's fun being old. The great thing about being old is I can go to the movies all the time. When I was young, I'd have to wait for a new movie to come out. Now that I'm old, I can just go back and see the movie, and I'll think, this is vaguely familiar, but I can't remember it. So I enjoy a good book. I enjoy a good movie. I can even eat 12 times a day. So it's wonderful. The problem is I can't find where I parked my car. So what I do, like if I was an event like this with you, what I do is I just stick around and read a book, which I probably have read before, and I wait till the crowd all goes out and gets their car, then I go out, and mine's the only car in the parking lot. And I say, well, there it is, and I drive home. So if you have a good attitude, you can just adjust. And now they've got these keys, you can punch a button and your car will honk. But that's not perfect, because sometimes I'm in these parking garages and I get on the wrong floor. And I can hear my car honk, and I think it's either above me or beneath me. You know, it's not here, it's not here, it's right here. But it's not on this floor. And it's a lot of work going up and a lot of work going down and then coming back up. So I got to think real hard to try to figure out where my car is. Usually I can find my car. The problem is I can't find my keys. So I'm just hoping that I will live long enough that they will eventually discover a car that you can touch the car, which is usually in the garage, and my keys will honk. Then I can go find my keys. I'll keep track of the car. You help me with my keys, is what I say. I've tried to figure this out. You say, why don't you Google? Well, I do Google, but I forget what I find. And I remember at one time Googling, and I thought, well, gee, I've lost either my long-term memory or my short-term memory, but I can't remember which one. Sometimes I think, well, I must have my short-term memory, or I wouldn't know that I had lost it. And then at other times I think, well, maybe this has been going on a long time. So it's a constant, there's another dilemma that I'll just share with you since I'm sharing this, because maybe someone in the audience will give me an answer. I always hold out that hope. Maybe somebody in the audience has given me an answer. Anyway, I will ask, how do you know whether or not you have Alzheimer's disease? I mean, maybe you have it, maybe the doctor told you and you forgot. You don't know. The other thing is, how do you know whether or not you're dying of anorexia or nervosa? You can't know. You say, well, I know. I can look in the mirror and I can see I'm overweight. Well, that's the first symptom of anorexia nervosa. You think you're overweight. So there's a lot of issues that trouble me. Anyway, so I'm a real old guy, and when I went to church, I'm telling you, they didn't have music like Hillsong, and there weren't weird things going on. It was even more weird. And when they tell the story of David and Goliath, they'd use what they called a flannel graph board. I have tried to describe a flannel graph board to young people, and I can't do it. I mean, it's like a VCR. And I have people say, what's a VCR? And I say, well, it's like a DVR, only it's a separate box, a VCR. And you put this cartridge in it that's like a tape. Never mind. Well, a flannel graph board was a board that the Sunday school teacher would put up for the kids to try to keep their attention. And it was made, it had wood, it was on a tripod, and it had flannel. And then they had these little pictures cut out with cloth on the back, and they'd put these up on the flannel graph board, and they'd kind of stay. It wasn't, very strong stay. So they'd curl up and fall down, and the teacher would pick them up and try to get them to stay. And all of the teachers, I don't know where they got these teachers, but all of them were artistically deprived. They did not understand depth. So they would put a great big tree up here, and then a little tree down here, and then a rock over there. They get it all mixed. And as a little kid, I'd want to get up there and scramble the board for them and help them and say, no, the big tree goes down here. The little tree is in the distance. It goes up here. But they hated kids. Older people, when I was younger, just hated kids. They especially hated me. So they didn't like me. They just, shut your mouth, kid. So I'd have to sit there and look at some stupid display on the flannel graph board. And when they told the story of David and Goliath, they would usually do it like this. They would have Goliath on one side of the flannel graph board, a paper figure, and he'd look like this. And then on the other side of the flannel graph board, they'd have the Israeli army. Well, they didn't have all 20,000 of them, but they'd have maybe 5 of them, and they'd look like this. And then in the middle, in between, they'd have David, and they usually made him a teenage boy, which is not true. We don't know if he was a teenage boy. But they'd have him in the middle, and they'd have him, he'd look like this. And then they'd carefully read their script, and they'd say, David was not afraid, boys and girls. All the Israelis fled, but David, he stood there and faced the giant. And David said, Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? Well, that's not true. That's not, well, he said that, but not then. So, and we would say, us little kids would say, teacher, 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 teacher. Yes, what does uncircumcised mean? And the teacher would say, shut up, you little kids, you dirty little kids. So, and I would go home from Sunday school, I would feel awful because I'd think, number one, I'm a coward because if I see a giant, I'm probably going to run. So I'm a coward. David, he stood there. Number two, I'm dirty. So, but I got news for you. The truth is they lied. The truth is David looked like this. He ran too. He ran from Goliath. Now, when you read this book, this best-selling New York Times book, Goliath represents a major crisis, a major problem in your life. Goliath may be cancer to one person. Goliath may be bankruptcy to another. Goliath may be divorce. Now, there's some of you get divorced all the time. It's no big deal. That's not a Goliath, you know. That's like, hello, it's Monday. Or you go bankrupt all the time. That's no big deal. Oh, here we go again, bankrupt. We got to get a new house, a new apartment. So, but for some people, that's a crisis. And so by definition, Goliath is something you can't beat. It's something that's going to beat you. And just keep this in mind as you hear this story. Goliath was the best thing that ever happened to David. Without Goliath, we wouldn't be talking about him today. And because of Goliath, he became a king and a ruler, and he changed the world. That's the power of your problem. So yes, you hate this problem, and it's terrible, and it's scary, but it just may be the best thing that ever happened to you. Got to do something with your life at some point. And if you do anything that's really exciting and really worthwhile, there's going to be a bully standing between you and victory. Sorry. So you can say, ooh, this is harder than I thought. I'm going to go over here and do this. There'll be another bully there eventually. Oh, this one's too hard too. I'm going to go over and do this. There'll be another bully there. Wherever you go. So you got to finally decide at some point to be successful in life, you have to understand there'll always be a wall built around success to keep you out, to keep the pretenders out. At a certain point, you have to figure out how to go under that wall or over that wall or through that wall. At some point, you have to defeat the giant or kill the dragon to be successful. And you can do it. A little boy can do it. You can beat someone who's bigger than you. But you have to have the right strategy, which is what we're talking about. And it's not about courage. If it was about courage, David would have stayed there. Hey! No, he ran. He fled. Who wants divorce? Who wants bankruptcy? Who wants cancer? Who wants trouble? Nobody in their right mind wants to fight a giant. David ran like everybody else, and they ran up into those limestone cliffs that I was describing, and he got up there, and by the time they got there, if you can imagine, a little city moving 2 miles to the left, he lost his brothers. And he didn't know where they were, they didn't know where he was, they got lost in the crowd. And he found some other soldiers, and he sat down with these soldiers. They were around a campfire, and they began talking, and this is a fascinating discussion. And he heard some of the soldiers talking to the other soldiers, and they asked a question, have you heard what the king will do for the man who kills Goliath? Have you heard what the reward is for the man who kills Goliath? And the other soldiers who were there said, yes, we have heard. The man who kills Goliath will marry his daughter, the princess, Michelle. He will ride on a horse. He will own land. He will be free in Israel. He and any of his descendants throughout all history will never pay taxes as long as there's a king on the throne of Israel. And David, who was sitting there, said, what? Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? So I hate to break it to you, but I told you this is an adult story. So the Sunday school teacher has it all wrong. He didn't say that when he saw Goliath. He said that when he heard about income tax exemptions. That's when he said it. And you can understand now why you weren't told that as a child, because how do you explain that stuff to kids? So they just kind of skip over that stuff. They think you're not old enough for it. Well, you're now old enough for it. And the fact is that what got David's interest was not Goliath. It was the reward. It wasn't a fight. It wasn't macho. It wasn't a challenge. I can do this. It was Michelle. It was a princess. It was riding on a horse. It was eating at the king's table. It was being a prince, nobility in just one battle. Suddenly, nobility forever. And it was freedom. It was independence. That's what his battle was all about. And he said, what? And who is this uncircumcised Philistine? And when you read this story in 1 Samuel, it says, and they repeated it all again. My wife sometimes will say, if I say something nice, she'll say, what? I'll say, boy, your hair looks good that way. She'll say, what? She wants me to repeat it, see? So, and that's what David, he heard what they said, but he's looking up suddenly. Did somebody say my name? Prince? Did I hear the word prince? So, yes, they repeated again. The man who kills Goliath will ride on a horse. He will own land. He will eat at the king's table. He will be a prince. He will marry the king's daughter. And he and his descendants will never pay taxes as long as there's a king on the throne of Israel. Now, this is the beginnings of the formula of how you beat your problem. You get focused on the reward, the dream. You've heard that from the time you've been in network marketing. You've heard people talk about the importance of the dream, and you've said, yes, 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 what else? But this is the most important thing. And what's so weird to me is it doesn't cost you anything. People will say, well, I'd like to be successful, but I don't have an education. I'd like to be successful, but I just moved here and I don't know anybody in town. I don't have any contacts. I'd like to be successful, but I just don't have any money. But none of that stops you from dreaming, and dreaming is the first step to success. So here you are standing there, and you could take the step that everybody agrees is the most important step and the first step, and you won't take it. You don't have to have an education to dream. You don't have to have money to dream. You don't have to live in a big city to dream. You don't need any of those. Nothing stops you from dreaming, and this is the first and even most important step to success, is to think it. How would it come? What would it be like? Who would I talk to? What would I say? How could I say it differently? How would they react? Then what would I say? Who else could I talk to? How could I get help from someone else to talk to those same people? What would happen the first week? What would happen the first month? What would happen the first year? This is where success comes. It comes from focusing on the reward, not the problem. It's how God operates. Aren't you glad that God's kind of a positive guy? I mean, God looked down at Moses, and one day Moses, he was an old guy. He was under a lot of stress. I kind of like Moses. He probably lost his car a lot too. And he got so stressed that he committed murder. I guess I've got that to look forward to. He committed murder, and then he fled to the wilderness. And out in the wilderness, he watched the sunrise and the sunset, and he drank the fresh water, and he ate the fresh vegetables, and he married, and he had children, and he had grandchildren, and he had great-grandchildren. And he enjoyed his faith. He would go up on this mountain, privately, all alone, up on this mountain. It was a ritual. And he would go up on that mountain, and one day he was up on his mountain. It must have been quite a climb for an 80-year-old guy. And he looked back towards Egypt, and he had this rare sensation. You know, he could hear the hum of the highway and the trucks, and he could see the lights on the interstate in the distance. And he began to think, you know, I feel so healed, I feel so rested, I feel so good all the pain is gone from what I've been through. I feel like going back there and fighting City Hall. I feel like going back there and taking them on, those dirty, rotten rats. I feel like setting those slaves free. And he felt like 40, but he was 80 years old. And his life was over. And while he was on that mountain, God whispered into his ears, go get him. Go bring him out. Bring him right here. Bring him where you were healed. Let him drink this water. Let him breathe this fresh air. Bring him to your mountain. And then as far as he could see all over his mountain, he could see little campfires of where the Israelis would be camped, and he could hear the bells around the goats' necks as they were ringing, and the children laughing and playing. And that happened. He went back to Egypt. He had his confrontation with City Hall. He brought the slaves out of Egypt, and he literally brought them back to his mountain where he had been all by himself. He had this dream, and God spoke to him from a burning bush, you know that story, and told him about a land flowing with milk and honey. I find it very interesting that the whole Israeli nation burns out in the desert. They had seen the Red Sea divide, but they had not seen the burning bush. They didn't have the vision of a promised land with milk and honey. So the vision is what will carry you. You don't need a miracle. You need a vision. If you get a vision, a dream, an idea of where you're headed, that's the power that will take you through to success. That's the same story with Joseph. Now you look at the story with Joseph. They called Joseph a dreamer. In fact, at one point, they made fun of him, his brothers, and they said, behold, the dreamer cometh. You know, here comes the dreamer. Now, why did they call him the dreamer? You say, well, because he dreamed dreams. But you dream dreams. They dream dreams. We know now scientifically that everybody dreamed a dream last night. And they say when you wake up in the morning, if you don't jump out of bed, if you'll just stay there tomorrow morning, if you'll just stay in bed a few seconds, if you'll have a pad of paper next to your bed and a pencil, and you don't react, just lay there in bed when you wake up, you'll remember your dreams. You can jot it down. And if you don't do that, it'll be gone within seconds. But everybody in this room dreamed a dream last night, and they will again tonight. And Joseph's brothers, they all dreamed dreams like he dreamed dreams. But they called him a dreamer. You know why they called him a dreamer? Because he believed that his dreams were real and that they were right. He was not ashamed or embarrassed about his dreams. We say, how can I dream a dream of personal success when half the world is starving to death? How selfish. But Joseph believed that his dreams were real and that his dreams were right. Now, God could have given Joseph nightmares and they would have been true. God could say, see this pit? You're in a pit, Joseph. Smell the clay, smell the urine. This is a pit. This is where your brothers put you in here. Your brothers! Get ready for the pit because it's coming. They've thrown you in here to die, and at some point a wild animal's going to fall in here and tear you to pieces. I want you to be prepared for the pit so you don't panic and you understand it's part of my plan. There's a plan for the pit. So be ready. But God never let him see the pit, but it was coming. God could have showed him a courtroom. Has the jury reached a verdict? Yes, we have, Your Honor. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty. What? Guilty as charged. He never saw it coming. There's nothing that hurts like misunderstanding. You know, almost every person in this room is misunderstood right now by somebody. There's a relative or a friend or a neighbor. There's someone in business, someone below you or beneath you in your network. There's someone in the company or there's someone in another country. There's someone somewhere who misunderstands you, and you can't do anything about it. You're helpless. And here's something that's interesting. Probably Everybody in this room misunderstands somebody else. There's somebody else somewhere in the world, or maybe right here in this room, that you misunderstand, and they can't write you a letter, they can't send you a text, they can't pull you aside in the hall and explain it. They're totally at your mercy. So here's Joseph. He's got all of this pain ahead of him, and God doesn't let him see it. He's a smart-aleck young kid. You know, he has a dream where the stars and moon bow down to him. And his old dad, Jacob, Jacob wants Joseph to get along. He wants his brothers to like him. Jacob likes Joseph. He pulls him aside and says, "What is your deal? Do you want your mother and I to worship you? What is your deal?" He's trying to help Joseph along. You know, you're not making sense here. But in the middle of the night, he'd have a dream. He'd get all his brothers up. Get up, get up, get up, get up, get up. I've had a dream. I've had another dream from God. Don't you hate people like that? He says, oh, get here, get around the fire. I'm going to tell you what I've had in my dream. Where's Reuben? I can't tell my dream till Reuben gets here. Reuben, will you get out here so you start dreaming and go back to bed? So they all get around the campfire, and Joseph tells them his dream. In my dream, my haystack was in the middle, and all of your haystacks surrounded my haystack, and your haystacks were bowing down to my haystack. What can this mean? First, we'll hear from you, Reuben. You're the oldest, and let's discuss this. Well, they didn't like his dream, and they won't like your dream. And they didn't like David's dream. David was talking to these guys, and he was saying, wait, what is the reward for the man who kills Goliath? And is this posted somewhere? He's asking questions of complete strangers. They don't know who he is. He's away from home. They don't know who he is. They think, well, he's kind of short. He doesn't look, he doesn't look that old to me, and he's not in uniform, but maybe he knows karate or something, So they're impressed. He's a complete stranger. They're impressed. And all of a sudden, Eliab, his oldest brother, finds him. And Eliab sees that David is there talking with strangers, soldiers, who are having a normal conversation with him like he's a normal human being. Their creepy, zero, zip, nothing little brother is being treated like a normal person. And Eliab, it says, Eliab's angry. And he says, there you are. We were looking for you. You've had a big day. You've heard the band play. You've seen the uniforms. You've seen the soldiers in action. This is a big day for you. Now, let me ask you a question. Who's in charge of the few sheep you're responsible for at home while you're away? He wanted to make sure that those soldiers knew that they were talking to a zero. They couldn't stand the idea that anybody in the world would be impressed with their little brother. And that's what they're going to do to you. And it will be your closest friends and it could be your brothers. It was Joseph's brothers. It was Eliab's brothers. It doesn't mean that you hate your brothers. It just means you've got to move on. You can go back for them, but you've got to move on. What does David do when they attack him? Here's what it says. He turned from them to another. He got out of there. He left them. That's what you got to do. That person who calls you up and they're your best friend and they say, oh, I hate to tell you this, but now they're saying this and they're saying, you got to know, you got to deal with this. What do? That person that's your best friend. And every time you hang up, you feel worse for having talked to them. You got to get away from that. You got to find somebody else. That's what David did. He left them. He found somebody else. That's what you got to do. They say you can throw a lobster in a pot of boiling water and it'll jump right out. But if you put 2 lobsters in a pot of boiling water, they can't get out. One of them will try to get out, and the other one will say, where do you think you're going, pal? And that's what will happen to us. They're going to say to you, look, let's get this straight. I'm poor, you're poor, we're all poor. Nobody gets out. Have you ever noticed that they don't get sad for you? They don't cry for you. They get mad at you. Why do they get mad? Why don't they have an intervention? If they really loved you, why don't they have an intervention and you come home and they say, oh, darling, come on in here and sit down. What are you doing here in the middle of the day, Dad? Well, I got off work for you, honey. Mom, what are you doing here? We're here for you, sweetheart. Rosemary, what are you? Rosemary, how did you get here? I drove hours to get here, baby. I love you. We're here because we love you. We're worried about this thing you're doing. Why? I told you I'm doing. Yes, but honey, we're afraid you're going to spend all your money and time and nothing's going to come out of it, honey. You can't see. You need us to tell you. Why don't they have an intervention and tell you how much they love you and why they don't want you to get hurt? They don't do that. They get mad. They get angry like Joseph's brothers. They want to throw you in a pit. They get like Eliab's brother. Oh, there you are. What about the sheep you're supposed to take care of? You know, you're going to be a big shot in business? Ha! Why do they get mad? Because you're an indictment to them. You've got a dream. It's not that they're afraid you're going to be successful. They are absolutely convinced you will not be successful. What makes them angry is you think you're going to be successful. And they don't want that. So David found somebody else. And my best advice for you is to find somebody. Find somebody somewhere in the world who will agree with you, who will fight. If you want to save this marriage, it doesn't matter what the odds are, the numbers are, the book says, or your neighbors say, or the family says. If you want this marriage, you want to fight for it, find somebody who will agree with you and help you. If you want to make this business work, if you want to beat this heart trouble, if you want to lose this weight, it doesn't matter what the odds are, what other people say. You find somebody who will say, here's my phone number, text me any time of the day or night. I won't read it in the night, but text me anyway. And I'm with you, and we will fight this thing. You need someone who agrees with you. Now, don't you want criticism? Of course you do. And don't you want good counsel? Of course you do. And don't you want to make wise decisions? Of course. You need all the data you can. I'm just telling you, the formula for beating Goliath is a bit different. You don't join the Arthritis Book of the Month Club and get focused on, oh, honey, here's a new article on heart disease. You've got to read this. You focus on what your body's going to be like when you lose that weight and when you're out there jogging and when your heart is pumping and it's strong and when you're cancer-free and when your marriage is healed and when your relationship with those kids are healed and when you get that paycheck. And it's not getting the paycheck. It's not depositing the paycheck. It's a month later when you see that it actually cleared the bank. That's what you've got to stay focused on to make this thing work and to beat Goliath. So David found somebody else. He left his brothers. Don't worry about David's brothers. They're all going to be royalty. They're all going to be worth a fortune. Don't worry about them. They'll be taken care of. He found somebody else. This is taking care of business. And when he found somebody new that he had not yet talked to, you can read this in 1 Samuel 17. He asked them a question. And what was his question? What is left to know? What does David need to know to kill Goliath? He finds somebody new and he asks the following question. What is the reward for the man who kills Goliath? Isn't that an amazing story? For the third time in that same story. Now, if you and I were there, we'd be going all over the place asking questions about Goliath. Know your enemy. Okay, exact height and weight. Okay, how fast can he run? That's real important. How fast can he run? How far can he throw the spear?
And who was his coach in high school? Who was his coach in college? Where did he go to college? And you'd want all this information. You know, does he have any brothers and sisters? What's his military background? And you'd want to know the enemy. We got to know the enemy. Knowledge is power. Goliath, Goliath, Goliath. Did you know that every morning and afternoon Goliath was giving the same speech? You know why he was doing that? Because they didn't have a microphone. Most people didn't hear the speech, so they were rotating back and forth to hear the speech. So somebody'd say, hey, we're taking a bus up there in the afternoon. I've gone ahead, and we've got some people here together. We've rented a bus. If you want to go, it'll only cost $20. We're not making any money off this. But we've got a lot of expenses. Oh, this may be the last bus we take. We've got tons of expense. We've got insurance. We've got to pay the bus driver. Now we got to get a second bus driver because of a new Israeli federal regulation. So we got to have 2 bus drivers to get up there. So it's very expensive, but we'll do it for $20. We're doing it for you. We're doing it for you. It's $20 if you'd like to get on the bus. Sign up. Now, first want to ask all those who have previously heard Goliath's speech. Raise your hand. Oh, okay. Well, we're going to ask you to wait until those who haven't heard his speech buy a ticket. Then we'll open it up to those of you who have. But just out of curiosity, how many of you have heard all 6 of Goliath's speeches so far? Whoa, okay. Okay, that's cool. You could probably quote it. But first, let's let those who haven't heard Goliath's speech buy tickets, then we'll open it up to everybody. So their buses are going back and forth. Isn't this amazing? And Goliath's giving a speech. I want to say one thing about the speech. It was good. It was good. Because when they saw Goliath, they didn't run. It was after he gave his speech that they ran. They walked out to fight Goliath. Boy, that guy's big. He sure is. They were ready to die. I mean, when you die, who cares whether, you were killed by Goliath or Tyrone Lannister? What difference does it make? You're still dead. So all they're thinking is, this is it. They're going out to fight. They're going to die. What they ran from was Goliath's speech. Goliath was smart. We usually think giants are dumb. We say that about blondes. We say, blondes are dumb. We do that because blondes are beautiful. So we don't want them to have everything. So we say, yeah, they're beautiful, but they're dumb. We also say that about giants because they're already giants. So we say, well, they're dumb. Duh, I'm a big giant. Duh. But Goliath was smart. He was smart. His speech was good. It was brilliant. You can read parts of it in 1 Samuel 17. When you read the parts, it doesn't explain why the army panicked, but it gives you an idea of the content. It was kind of a Vietnam syndrome type speech. Goliath was saying, here we are. You're a nation of 3 million. We're a nation of 3 million. We're about to go to battle. And here in this dry riverbed, the blood will flow. How many will die? 20,000 young men will die here. 3 million in your country, 3 million in ours. 20,000 will be sacrificed. You will be sacrificed. Why? What's so sacred about 20,000? Why not 10,000? Why not 5,000? Why not 100? Why not 1? You choose a gladiator, and we will choose a gladiator. Let them fight, and may the loser serve the winner. That was kind of the basis of his speech. Whatever it was, the logic rang a bell of truth in the Israelis, and they were thinking, I'm not going to die. I'm not going to be in the 20,000. There's 3 million back there in my country. Why do I have to be the guy who dies here within the next 24 hours? I'm out of here. And they're gone. So Goliath was very, very smart, and he was already the champion of the Philistines, but he had an inferiority complex. He had all the inferiority a freak of nature would have. He couldn't buy his shoes at Walmart. He had the special order. So here comes David, and Goliath panics, and he loses his temper, and he gives another speech, which you can read. You got to read this. Am I a dog that you send a boy to fight against me? And here comes David, filled with the dream. While everybody else is listening to Goliath's speech, David, he's back in the camp saying, is it true that the princess bathes in perfume? Have you heard that? This is David. You got to love David. So here he comes. You know, when your kid comes home from school and they've got an A+, you take that paper that's an A+ and you put it up on the refrigerator and you put little magnets to hold it up there. You know it's not their paper. You can see where they've erased the name and they put somebody else's name up there. But you still put that up there. Why do you do that? You don't, if your child gets an F, you don't take that F in there and put it on the refrigerator and say, see this F? Do you know what F stands for? Failure. You know what that means? You are a failure. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to take this F to work tomorrow and I'm going to have it faxed to your Aunt Hazel. That's what I'm going to do. Every time you get a glass of milk, I want you to see F. I want you to see how you've humiliated your mother and I. You don't do that to them. You put A+ up there. Why? Because you want to hurt your children? No, because you know your children are going to get, they're going to get beat up. You know that kids are going to line up on the playground and they're going to say, you have a big nose. You know that's going to happen. You want there to be one place on earth where they're an A+, and you can count on an A+. They're expected to do A+. So let me ask you a quick question. Why do you put your own failures on the refrigerator door? Why do you wake up in the morning and start thinking about the mistakes you've made and the things you've said wrong and the things you've done wrong and the things you haven't done right? What are you trying to do to yourself? You would never do that to your children. You would destroy your children if you did that to them. What are you doing to yourself? Get that garbage off of the refrigerator door. Quit focusing on your failures. Quit focusing on your mistakes. Start focusing on what's going to happen when you win, when you succeed, when this works. Get a dream and stick with that dream. And David came out there and his speech was, you come to me with a sword and a shield and a spear. I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom thou hast defied. This day the Lord will give you into my hands, and I will take your head from you, and I will deliver the carcasses of the hosts of the Philistines to the wild beasts of the earth and the fowls of the air, and the whole earth will know there is a God in Israel, and all of this assembly will know that God does not save with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into my hands. And those were the last words Goliath heard. He fell over. David's thinking, I didn't hear a clink. I mean, I must have hit him smack dab right in his forehead, or else I missed him by a mile and he's faking it. And Goliath went down, and David walked out there and pulled out his sword. And if you read this story, the Israelis are quiet. They're strangely quiet. David's brothers are standing there and they're saying, you gotta be kidding me. He is the luckiest. And other soldiers are standing there. Is this real? He's down. He's down. Who's down? Goliath, 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 Goliath. He cut off his head. Who cut off his head? Goliath cut off David's head? No, David. Whose head is off? Goliath, 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 Goliath. Is he dead? How far is the head from the body? And that's when, if you read the story, when his head was cut off, that's when the Israelis gave a great shout. There was a little delayed reaction there. Not till they saw his head off did they say, oh my goodness, people are going to be talking about this for 10 years. My goodness. Look at this guy. He's a little guy. I could have done that.
Oh, how old is this guy? He's a prince. And David's thinking, Michelle, ma belle. So we will have giants, and we will face giants, or we'll never do anything great in our lives. And when we face those giants, we don't focus on what they weigh or how fast they are or how big they are. We put our focus on what is going to happen to us when we win this battle. Because if the dream is big enough, you can win this battle. Thank you very much.